Hello, everybody. This is Aurika Savitskaite from helmet-based-ventilation.com. And we have a guest today, Dr. Zaid Altawil. He's an adjunct assistant professor of emergency medicine, Department of Boston Medical Center. He completed residency at the Boston Medical Center, and he's a founder of Innovation Group that leads efforts to offer technological solutions to challenges brought by COVID pandemic. He also is a co-founder of HackED, a medical hackathon that focuses on innovation in emergency medicine. So you are in the same group of listeners of this interview. It's all about innovation. It's all about using simple technology to optimize what we are doing on a daily basis in the units and ER and the field. And I really was impressed what I learned about it. So one of these innovations I heard on NPR was the snorkel kits for doctors during the PPE shortage. Can you just tell me a little bit about that, and then any other innovations that you did?
So that project, which was an amazing, like a great project that came up in the COVID pandemic, was actually, I was part of a larger group of sort of tech founders and innovators in the Boston area and beyond that wanted to solve the issue of PPE. So they had come up with a solution that had been seen in other places as well, but they optimized it and made the supply chain model for it very efficient to be able to get it to providers that need it. And I was part of the testing group that helped them both test it and sort of iterate on it and improve it, but also implement it at our own hospital and giving them the feedback that we sort of had with our own experiences with it. So that was one of the projects that we worked on. And if you look at their, most of their work currently, it's awesome. I can give you a link later that you can join or to review. Thank you so much for having me here. I've heard so much about you. I've actually used your website a lot for when I wanted to start, want to do some of our innovations at Boston Medical, including the helmets. So I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thank you. You know, I really feel so, you know, happy when I know that people are using the website. I can see that a lot of users come and we go through what pages. So if anyone wants to subscribe and get the news, they can do it on the website. All right, so you also mentioned about like how to optimize, how to improve the ventilation for patients during COVID in your facility and others. So there are some ways to communicate, right? Some ways to improve the ventilation for these patients. And I'm talking now about the invasive ventilation, right? Yes. Right. Can you just talk a little bit about it too?
So as similar to how other providers faced a similar challenge in the United States at the beginning of COVID, ventilators, there was a feared shortage of ventilators. In some places in the country, there was an actual shortage. In others, there was more of a feared shortage and a need to sort of plan for that eventual shortage. There was a concern, of course, with non-invasive ventilation being a way of aerosolizing infectious particles. And what we saw in our city, as in the city of Boston, as well as Boston Medical Center specifically, that the rates of use of non-invasive ventilation plummeted drastically. So we had a double sort of problem of patients who we had more patients that needed non-invasive ventilation and positive pressure, but at the same time, we had less use because of the worry of the infection risk. So it almost quadrupled, in a sense, the issue at hand. At that time, as part of the integration group that we started, which was started to tackle such challenges that came up suddenly and didn't give enough time for the more traditional methods of problem solving to take the lead. We started to look for other ways that we could solve this problem, right? We had seen a lot of cool things out of Italy at that time, and cool in the sense of something innovative. Obviously, the situation at that time was very drastic, but we thought, how could we take the, I guess, the inspiration from some of our colleagues abroad and see what solutions they've done that have been helpful and see if they apply it to us. So
Yeah, and you're talking, this was when, in March 2020?
this was about, yeah, March going into April 2020. So we had already at that point started to do solutions at the hospital,
Mhm.
and we were able to afford, or we gave ourselves some good credibility as a group of doctors and nurses that were sort of thinking outside of the box, able to circumvent some of the red tape that was present at the time in order to get our solutions to the patients that need them.
Mhm.
So it was a perfect opportunity for us to introduce a new technology that is not really commonplace in the United States and have patients benefit from it. So it was the right place and right time kind of situation where we have a group of people who were doing different things, but showed that they could do different things, and an innovation that was a bit or pretty much really outside of the box for respiratory support. And by having both of these elements together, we were able to introduce it successfully at our hospital.
So this is when you were using which helmets? Did you use at that time
So it was we used, I think the first helmet that we tried was the Amron helmet.
Okay.
It's a good product. You've had it on your website. We had some pros and cons, I'm going to say, and we wanted to try some other products. The one we settled onto is, I guess the case is most people, the Sealong helmet, but that's because they were the first that were out there almost, or the one that was more readily available with its own shortages, but it was available.
Yeah.
We did trial the Subsolve as well, and we were part of the team that helped them with their FDA EUA approval. And those, I think, were the most, or the helmets we used the most. We did talk about the not the respirator, the other one.
The StarMed.
Yeah, the StarMed one. But at that point in time, when StarMed became introduced in the United States, or at least they had approval to market their products, our COVID numbers started trailing downwards, and we started being able to use our traditional face masks again. So it wasn't a perfect time to start with a new product.
Yeah, the Subsolve and StarMed, we got their approval in August of 2020.
Exactly.
Yeah, we didn't have so many cases. So you did the, so can you tell me a little bit more, how did you implement this new technology? Because I can hear from so many colleagues how we get so excited about something new, right? Like in this case is helmet, and how we wanted to put that helmet on a patient today. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. You end up going through so many regulatory, processes, through so many approvals, through so many requests, and it can take like a really long time, months I'm talking about. How did you do? Do you have any tips? How can like new technology enter the patient's room sooner, and and then again, we're going to talk about implementation a little bit later.
Right. So what you mentioned is the central problem in introducing technologies or new technologies in healthcare, right? There is always a sense of urgency in medicine, right? There's patients that are suffering and dying every day. And when you get your hands on something new that could potentially be beneficial, there is that excitement to get it out there quickly. So the sense of urgency is there. But at the same time, you have to appreciate the responsibility of this is an intervention that could either go well for the patient or go really poorly, right? And there's a certain responsibility behind implementing something new without having the track record of knowing what the specific patient experience is going to be. And hospitals are very aware of this, and that's why approvals take a long time. I would say maybe 75% of the reason approvals take a long time are for this. 25% are for your usual bureaucratic processes that take forever. I guess the lucky factor with our implementation of the helmet was it was the height of the COVID surge in our city, and things were turning towards a sort of drastic corner where we needed to act fast. So that is the one thing that I will say that played into our advantage during that time. Now, that being said, there are certain things that you need to recognize when you want to implement something new. And primarily you have to realize that you're dealing with human beings, right? And it's really focusing on what are the human factors in bringing something new that play into the whole situation. What I mean by that is that you need to know that whenever you want to bring something new into your clinical sphere, you have to realize that you need to be able to motivate a large group of people to think along the same lines you do. And with that, you need to understand what motivates them as well. So for us, we had an intervention that we needed to apply. We had a patient population that we knew could benefit from this intervention. We were able to do the background research to see that this is in fact effective elsewhere. And from then it was developing a plan for how could I make everybody else's job easier. So whenever you want to implement something, you need to understand that people are always busy. And when you're doing something new, that's adding more to people's respective plates. And when it's a big pandemic, people have a lot on their plates already. So they're going to be very resistant to that change. So first of all, you need to identify who your primary stakeholders are, who are the people that make the decisions within their respective field of expertise. And then you have to think about how to make their job easier, because otherwise they won't go through. So with us, we identified, we can talk specifics about the helmet, for example. So, right, we have, for us, the primary stakeholders are, and this is not in any order, but the physicians who take the clinical decision, right? The respiratory therapists that will apply the intervention, the nurses that will take care of maintaining the intervention. They have different names in different departments, but like the central processing departments, and the environment maintenance staff that will be cleaning up the helmets or disposing of them afterwards. And then hospital leadership that needs to approve all of these things.
Yeah.
So we identified, what was that, like 5 stakeholders, and then it's basically targeting each one and saying, how could I make each one of their jobs easier in order for them to get the idea that I want on the ground faster. And while this sounds like manipulation, it's not. It's really, how can I streamline my process as much as possible? So for doctors like to have specific indications, specific protocols, and most importantly, they need evidence. So what we did with them is we basically reached out to our colleagues that have done that before. For example, Dr. Patel, the University of Chicago, who I'm pretty sure you know and have worked with. And from her, we were able to get the clinical indications, the sort of physician protocols, the contraindications, the evidence, all putting that in a very nice packet to tell our doctors, hey, this is how this could help. With our respiratory therapists, it was more of their specific issue was the lack of supplies, right? They have their ventilators that they need to think about. They were the ones that had to deal with divvying up the resources of ventilators. So as doctors, we can say, hey, I need to put this patient on a vent, but we really don't get into the weeds of what vent can I use? How many vents do I have left? Where do I need to mobilize them from which unit? So by coming at them from the angle that this is an intervention that can potentially decrease the use of our critical care vents, that's one way you can convince them to join the product, right? With our nurses, we have to think about what makes their patient care delivery experience easier, right? So they are the population that has the most hands-on contact time with the patients. So things that we take for granted as doctors, admin, whatever, such as cleaning the patient, having them eat, having them take breaks, having them be comfortable, those are significant pain points, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, nurses care about their patients a lot. They don't want to see their patients deteriorate and require intubation, which also adds more layers of taking care of them. So you need to understand, okay, how this intervention is going to make your job easier, and the way it's going to make your job easier is X, Y, and Z. So we're talking about motivation factors here, then we'll talk about the more specific. And then for our cleaning staff, or not cleaning staff, the central processing department that takes care of disinfecting and sanitizing everything in the hospital, a major component of a hospital, it was, hey, you need to know exactly how this needs to be taken care of. You have a lot on your plate because disinfection is a huge concern in the hospital. Let me get you the protocols. Let me help you get in touch with the manufacturer of the certain components about how best to clean them. And then let us both decide together, is it best to go through a disposable route, a reusable route, regardless of whether the intervention is made to be disposable or reusable. You know what I mean? So by making it so much easier for everybody else, it helps get the ball rolling because everybody literally needs to say okay rather than
Yeah.
what do I need to do.
So you put it together a very nice package and sold it, and it's
exactly.
And you didn't need to put any sugar powder on it or anything like that, because it's actually true. Everything what you said about the helmet,
Right, exactly.
this is exactly what you're gonna get.
Right.
And I like the way you have a goal to explain to all your customers, clients, right, that this is going to be a easy intervention. It's going to be easy technology to use. Definitely there was a learning curve. So can you tell me about that a little bit?
So a learning curve in terms of what exactly?
Using the helmet. So from the start, from let's say first helmet, after how many helmets, let's say respiratory therapist or a nurse or a doctor started to feel comfortable and thinking, okay, I can prescribe more of this therapy to this patient.
So it was mostly by watching our champions implement the helmet. The
Okay.
other providers sort of got more accustomed
Mm-hmm.
to using it and then asking for it.
Okay.
So we had champions in each particular sphere that I told you about.
Mm-hmm.
And those champions would come together to bring the helmet to a specific patient. So we would pick our patients to see who would benefit the most.
Mm-hmm.
Usually we would pick the patients where our regular non-invasive ventilation would have caused a bit of a challenge,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you have some of your patients that have a bit larger body habitus or are more claustrophobic. So going for the patients that were difficult to have a traditional face mask,
Mm-hmm.
and then having our champions implement it, hoping nothing goes wrong, having it done in the presence of other providers, and then hoping that they catch along too. So that was maybe the hardest part of the entire implementation, because it was more of you had to depend on the word of mouth and you had to depend on seeing other providers or having other providers witness you doing it easily so that they could do it at the same time.
Yeah,
So
it gives you some confidence, and at the same time, the patient feels also much better when he sees a doctor who knows what he's doing, right?
Right. However, there was still a learning curve. So what we have noticed in a lot of the literature, now less so than back in April and March, was that some of the intricacies were missing, right? Of, what kind of patient-specific comfort factors are there? I know on the whole, it's more tolerated by patients, but there were specific pain points that maybe had not been addressed earlier that made things difficult. For example, the movement of the helmets in various positions, that could cause some discomfort for patients. Some patients had them on too tight, so they would get specific, small abrasions in their skin or skin breakdown and irritation. And that represented the largest challenge in terms of the learning curve, because it's much easier to have somebody let go of something than to have them, persevere through the challenges. So the way we got around that was, making sure we follow up with the providers and telling them, hey, okay, I know you had this issue. This is how we could fix it next time. How do you think we could fix it next time? And that sort of thing. So the learning curve was there. And I don't think in our particular case, we were able to innovate in terms of the learning curve. Mm-hmm. And make it less of a curve than a straight line. But I think that's something that, over time we were able to do.
It comes with every new technology. So you don't have to expect that there will be no learning curve.
Right, exactly. I think we didn't know, it's like you never know what you don't know. And I think in that particular instance in our implementation, that learning curve, we did not know as much about that as we needed to be able to tackle it or prepare for it at least.
And for example, in Italy, even before COVID, when the helmet interface was implemented in the units, and they don't have very many ICUs. They usually have like a step down units for the respiratory distress patients. And they also have learning curve. And so again, super users you already mentioned. That's a great way to do it, and on both shifts, because unfortunately a lot of things happen on night shift because we don't have enough resources,
Right.
and then not enough staff around, and all the other issues. So that's one thing. And another, they also have like non-invasive ventilation designated units. So that brings, that experience, that learning curve makes more flatter in these units where it's used on a daily basis more often. So then we feel comfortable. And then slowly they spread out to the other units. So this is what I'm hearing. But you guys did an amazing job during this, during the pandemic, when the stress level is already so high, everybody is so tired, everybody is exhausted, working, many shifts in a row. So kudos to you, really. And now when we talk about the issues that you had with the helmet use, also just want to mention that it depends what type of helmet you're using. So, some helmets design are much better and will cause less or almost zero issues, like skin issues, for the patients who are using the helmet for long term. And this is another thing that you can always bring to your team and say, okay, guys, we know it works. Let's try a different design. Let's see if that's gonna improve the patient comfort. Because again, we are here to make sure that NIV is successful because the patient can tolerate it well. And now when you talk about the non-invasive ventilation, so you use the pressure support ventilation with the helmet, or did you use helmet CPAP also?
I think we did pressure support. We did use it similar to how we would implement the face mask with a BiPAP mode.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think CPAP, not as much. And it was mostly with our V60 ventilators. So we didn't really use it with any other modes. So we never did any of the wall oxygen supplies. We didn't use like the home CPAP machines. And we were preparing to use it with our critical care ventilators, but never actually moved there, thankfully.
Okay. Yeah, because that's another great way to save resources if you connect the helmet to the Venturi valve. So that's you creating that flow. You oxygen, oxygen levels can go up to, I believe, 60%, and that's usually patients who will benefit from PEEP. So that's another, step, another therapy that is so easy and so simple to implement. Now, did you have any connections in Italy? Did you talk with anyone from with Italian doctors about the helmet?
Not early on, no. We had it secondhand, if I'm remembering correctly, through I think our University of Chicago colleagues, but we didn't have any direct contact with them, at least early on, for this particular situation.
And now, how did the leadership help you? Like, was there an issue with getting supplies or getting education? Educators definitely were there all the time to.
So leadership actually in that stage was very helpful, in the sense of they recognized that there was a drastic situation in place and that things would need to move a bit faster, and that providers would have to have a bit more leeway in doing their interventions. So not to say that they told us do whatever you want, but in the sense of they helped facilitate as much as possible us coming up with new interventions. It also helped a lot that we had the infection control team on our side.
Yeah.
They were some of the primary stakeholders as well, and our early work was with them directly. So it was very helpful if we had the okay from them to have the okay from the rest of hospital leadership. We also had a COVID-specific budget that we were able to spend from. So that was very easy to approve purchasing of anything that we wanted. A lot of the work our group did with the hospital in the beginning was directly with our purchasing department and our central supply departments. And we had a very good relationship with them. So we were able to get almost whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted it, which was good. Bearing in mind the general supply chain issues outside of our hospital. I think without our hospital leadership at the time, we would not have been able to implement this as fast as we would have wanted to. But that's why it's nice to have a leadership that sort of adapts in times of crisis, and hopefully they adapt in times of crisis always. But they were very supportive, I think, at that point in time.
Well, definitely, that's very important, otherwise, I don't know if you had a helmet now.
Right, exactly. And I think that's also the key in making their jobs easier as well. As much as you can take work off anybody's plate and have them everything nicely packaged with a bow, things will move faster for you.
Exactly. So do you think helmets will be used after COVID pandemic?
So that's an interesting question. On the one hand, in terms of patient care, it does seem to be a much more tolerated procedure. The one hiccup that I would see for helmet ventilation is the number of people required to put it on. So when you can have one respiratory therapist put in a face mask on their own. You need a respiratory therapist and a nurse to put in a helmet. So that's one issue I see that could be a roadblock for broader implementation of helmets. I think people are very resistant to change anywhere. So there's a lot of the mantra of if it's not broke, don't fix it. And now that face masks can be used again, people might be a bit more resistant to go to something else. And I'm talking about hospitals that have not ever implemented helmet ventilation. But on the other hand, if all of the work of all the data that we have on helmets now comes to light and shows that it's a much better intervention, then there is a chance for helmet ventilation to see much broader use. I mean, we had one study in 2016, right, at the University of Chicago that showed improved outcomes, and that was just one study, one small.
And nothing happened.
Right. So now we have a lot more.
Yes.
A lot more patients. I mean, we didn't do any randomized controlled trials at the time, but at least we have a lot of anecdotal observational data that we can borrow from. So in that respect, I'm hopeful. We did do some work with some of the airlift services here, implementing helmets with them. So having people like, the patients that are being transported by helicopters have the helmet ventilation on. And that showed some mixed results, again, because of the need for more than one provider to implement it. So I'll say that the jury's still out. I'm not 100% sure if it's going to go up, stay the same, or go down.
Well, I hope it's going to stay. It will be available in our supply rooms, let's say this way, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
And then the doctors will have that freedom to decide, okay, this patient may benefit better than other. Because there are still going to be patients who will need NIV, and they will have, let's say, some facial issues or anything that, the face mask will never fit. So I feel like this is going to be one more chance for that patient to avoid intubation and maybe get over that, critical.
I completely agree. I think it's hard to say like a blanket statement of an intervention as a whole across the board. Is that going to improve or not? But it's like you said, the patient-specific factors, right?
Yes.
I mean, if you look at face mask ventilation on its own, we have the large face mask, the small face mask, the one over the nose. We have the high flow nasal cannula that's just for the nose. And a lot of our decisions are not purely based on the clinical aspects, but rather the patient's comfort and other factors. So, for example, when we were thinking about the StarMed helmet, we didn't think about implementing it across the board for all our helmets, but we thought, hey, what about the patients with a much larger neck who are more prone to skin breakage? They would benefit from the cushion provided by the StarMed helmet. So it might be a case of taking a patient-specific factor and seeing which of the interventions you have in your closet that you can apply it. So definitely very useful to have it lying around your facility.
And what is really nice about the helmet manufacturers, and I talked with all of them, the one that I know, and what is nice that we really working hard to improve the helmet interface, to make it as much more comfortable and easier to work, not just for the patient, but also for the clinicians too. So definitely, applying the helmet and removing the helmet, you need to have two people. And it can be an issue in some units, but I hope that's at the end, still patients will be able to use all the patient access ports, and it will minimize that application and removal steps for these patients.
And as an industry, we like trends. So the more
Yeah.
people use it, the more people are going to start to want to use it. So
Exactly. And and face masks are much more easier to use and much better to use if you know that you can fix the respiratory distress in the next 6 hours, right?
right.
You're not going to put the helmet on the patient when you know that it's going to be short NIV treatment. So again, I feel like when we're going to find that patient population that helmet will benefit the most, I think that will be easier for the physicians to create protocols and follow them and then use the interface. So what other innovations can you tell me about that you are using in ER or you're planning to use from that you are working with your group or with your Hack ED company? Can you share any?
So, to tell you about Hack ED, basically it's a medical hackathon. So a hackathon is, it sounds like hackers and computers, but it's more, how do you find a problem, bring it down to its root, and then bring a solution quickly through rapid iteration and rapid prototyping. So what we wanted to do was introduce that concept to emergency medicine. It had been done a lot in the tech sphere before, but not really in emergency medicine itself. So we basically had a competition where we had students from over 50 universities in New England and some from further abroad as well, who joined to tackle specific challenges that we presented to them. The challenges were brought on by crowdsourcing problems from doctors and nurses and people in the hospital, saying, hey, what are things that you'd like to see fixed? Giving them to a group of engineers, non-medical people, engineers, students, designers, and telling them you have 48 hours to come up with a solution. And some of the projects are still ongoing to this day. Some of the students who won are still trying to come up with companies to basically market their solutions. And from there, our innovation group sort of took its inspiration and now continues its work at Boston Medical. Some of the projects that we work on are in the simulation realm. So the need for rapid or quick surgical airways was a concern during the COVID pandemic. And as you know, surgical airways are a very rare procedure that providers don't necessarily have the opportunity to experiment or to practice on beforehand. So we're working with a company that specializes in 3D printing using artificial intelligence guided machinery to be able to create a small, cheap cricothyrotomy model that providers can practice on. We're doing some work that is in the pipeline right now for how to create open source technologies that we can apply in the clinical realm in the hospital through some of our collaborators at MIT and other universities and a fabricators network around the globe, which basically the concept behind it is how can you create something that is open source, meaning anybody can use it and anyone can apply it, but that also is clinically appropriate and fits within the guidelines of quality control for products. So it's all still early, still in the pipeline. I don't want to talk too much about it. But some of the other projects that we did early on in the COVID pandemic was the maskson.org that we spoke about earlier. We implemented a small project in the ICU with externalizing our IV setups outside of the room so that nurses didn't have to change in and out of their PPE in order to adjust medications and flow rates. We worked on a project currently to help. This is more for a global health aspect, but bringing monitors to ventilators that don't have monitors so that we can greatly expand the pool of usable, efficient ventilators in low and middle income countries. So a lot of projects are in our pipeline.
And you did mention low and middle income countries. So I saw some articles where you are involved in, innovation that can be used in the countries where equipment, where simple supplies that we have in a hospital here every day is just not available.
Right.
So,
So
yeah,
actually, that all of the work that we're doing now was inspired by that early work in global health.
okay.
We have this idea that the United States is at the peak of technology and that everything is greatly available, but sometimes that's not the case. And we noticed that with our work in the global health field, that sometimes the simplest things can have the greatest impact. And we thought, well, we need to combine both of these worlds, right? So if it's not,
think outside the box. This
right,
is
and if it's low cost and it doesn't work well, why are you implementing it in a low and middle income country, right? So for the way we think is if it works for outside, it can work for us here on the inside too. And if it doesn't, we shouldn't be doing it anyway. So that led to sort of trying to bridge both worlds of, it's low and middle income there, but we also have areas here that need it greatly. So why can't we do it here as well?
Yeah, that's wonderful. So your innovations will definitely affect not just the medicine in US, but in the whole world.
Hopefully, it's a work in progress. It's I think people are catching on to the idea that things in medicine do not have to be very slow, and we can do things fast, but also safely. So
and definitely, yeah, and definitely during this pandemic, we saw it can happen. Things that were innovated and made in such a short time and is used now, and it's already changing the future in medicine for us.
exactly.
And like one of those things definitely is helmet, and I'm passionate about it.
Yeah.
By the way, I have no conflict of interest.
No, of
The
course.
helmets are, I represent the physicians, and I want to make sure that they get all the information that we want, that we need about the helmets. And this is where, again, I'm so happy that we met, that we talked. You gave us great tips how to implement the new technology in a daily basis, how to use it in a hospital. And, I believe the main lesson is if it's simple technology and if it can make your job simpler, it's solved.
Yeah, and make other people's jobs easier and your things will
Exactly.
move faster.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. And we will stay in touch, and good luck with your innovations.
Thank you. Of course, it was great meeting you.